What is the value of W? To solve for W, the easiest way to do that is to cross multiply. You're going to multiply this numerator by this denominator. And since there's a couple of things up here in the numerator, you have to show it like this. 2 times W plus 3. Because if you do not put those parentheses and you just write 2W plus 3, then you're really only multiplying the 2 times the W, correct? You have to show that you're multiplying 2 by everything up there by putting it in parentheses, okay? So now when we multiply 4 times W minus 2, it'll be 4, parenthesis, W minus 2. Okay, now what do you think I'm going to do to simplify the left side? Distribute 2W plus 6, and then you're going to distribute the right side, and that will give you, right? And now you have a multi-step equation. You need to get your variables together on one side and your constants together on the other. So how do you want to start? Subtract what? Okay, if you minus 2W, it'll cancel out on this side, and then you minus it from the 4W over there. Now on the left side of the equation we have a 6, and on the right side we have what? 2W minus 8. Now what do you have to do? Add 8 to cancel it from this side and move it over there with a 6. Now we have what on the left side and what on the right side. And now to solve for W, what do? Divide by 2 and you get W equals 7. Okay, now, even if you didn't know how to do all of this work, if this had been a multiple choice question, you should be able to get this answer. Okay, because if W equals 7, and you go back up here and you replace both of the W's with 7, what's 7 plus 3 become? 10. So 10 over 4. What is 7 minus 2? And so you get 5 over 2. Are those equal? If you're not sure, in your calculator, type in 10 divided by 4 and see what it is as a decimal. Everybody type in 10 divided by 4. 2.5. Now type in 5 divided by 2 and see what you get. So that means they are equal, and that means 7 was the right number to go in the place of W. So think about it. If they were multiple choice and you had like 7, 6, 5, 4, couldn't you just take each of those numbers, plug them in for W, and see which one made a true statement? So you don't even have to do all the work if it's multiple choice. You just have to plug in the answers for W. Okay, now turn to page 18 in your packet. We'll have to go back to that later if we have time. We'll see. Okay, number 1. A taxi company in Atlanta charges $2.75 per ride plus $1.50 for every mile driven. Now, this scenario has been graphed below, but I'm also going to write the equation of it. From this scenario, what would your slope be? $1.50 x, and what does the x represent? Right, miles. It's $1.50 per mile, and then what's your y-intercept? 275. See, it's 275 per ride. That's like a flat rate. And then on top of that flat rate, you pay $1.50 per mile. Now look at our graph. Doesn't the y-intercept start right below the 3? So that would be 2.75. And then from there, $1.50 is the same thing as 3 over 2 as a fraction. We'll look up 1, 2, 3 over 2. I landed back on the line. 1, 2, 3 over 2. Okay? So we know our equations is okay because it works with the line that's been graphed. Alright, I am going to skip domain and range for a second because to me it's the hardest thing for y'all to understand. And let's go ahead and take care of the easy things. Alright, x-intercept is where the graph touches the x-axis. Does this graph touch the x-axis? Okay, so you think if you continued it this way it would touch at -1. Okay, but the graph cannot continue this way because look at your x-axis. Your x-axis is all about miles. So over here, even if it was -1, can you travel -1 miles? No. So the graph is not going to go beyond this point. It stops there. So for that reason, it never touches the x-axis. So the x-intercept does not exist. You can just write DNE. Okay, does everybody understand why the line will not travel to the left any further? Because at that point, you would be going into negative miles traveled and negative costs in dollars, and that would not make any sense. Okay, now, is there a y-intercept? Yeah, right here is where it hits the y-axis, and what are the coordinates of that point? 0, 2.75. The x value of it is 0, the y value of it is 2.75. Because that's the starting point, that's what you have to pay just to get a ride in the taxi. And then from there, it just goes up depending on how many miles you ride in it, correct? Okay, is this graph increasing or decreasing? Right, because it goes up from left to right. As the miles increase, the cost in dollars increase. So for that reason, isn't it also positive? Okay, continuous or discrete. Is there data along the whole line? Yeah, because think about it. When you get in the taxi, you don't have to say, like, I want to go 1 mile or 2 miles or 3 miles or 4 miles. You can say, like, my destination is about 2.25 miles from here. So there's data all along this line, and for that reason, it's continuous. Okay, now the maximum is the highest point on the graph. So look at this graph. Right, there's not a highest point because do we know how long this taxi is going to drive? And so for that reason, we don't know how high the cost will get. So you don't actually write infinity for maximum. There's no maximum point because it continues to infinity, so the maximum does not exist. Okay, is there a minimum point? Correct. Okay, now before I teach domain and range, I want you to go over to number 3 and try the x-intercept, y-intercept, and all below it. Okay, try that, starting where we did, try everything below it for number 3. X-intercept, is there a point plotted on the x-axis? No, so for this one it does not exist. Is there a y-intercept? What are its coordinates? 0, 1. Is this graph increasing or decreasing? It is increasing because it's going up, so it's positive. Is there data along the whole thing? No, it's discrete because there's only data at this point, this point, this point, and so on. Basically, if there's a line, it's continuous. If there's not a line, it's discrete. Right. Right, there's no data in between those points. Okay, is there a maximum point? There's not a highest point on that graph? Where is it? 9, 10. Is there a minimum point? Where is it? 0, 1. Okay, now let's talk about domain and range. So go back up to the first one. Okay, when you hear the word domain, you know we're talking about what? The x values. So somebody go up to the board and touch the furthest left the graph is. Like the furthest to the left the graph goes. But I want her to go touch it. Okay, but is it 3? Okay, it is here. But it's not either of those. Domain is all about x values. What's the x value of this point? 0. So the domain starts at 0 because the furthest left has an x value of 0. Well, first let's finish domain. First you do how far left it goes, then you do how far right it goes. How far right can I go? Forever. So 0 to infinity. Now remember, we've talked about this earlier in the year. If it stops, you put a bracket. If it doesn't stop, you put a parenthesis. Well, it stops here. Okay, so now for the range. Okay, look on the whiteboard. I wrote that up there so you could look back. The domain is x values, and you do how far left it goes and then how far right it goes. The range is y values, and you first put how low it goes and then how high it goes. So how low does this line go on the y-axis? 2.75. How high does it go? Infinity. It does not stop at infinity because it can continue forever, but it does stop at 275. You will never go below 275 because you have to pay that much just to get the taxi ride. You'll never pay less than that. Okay, now, for the graph in 3, it's a little bit different because it's not continuous. The furthest left point is here, correct? And what is the x value of that point? 0. But you cannot just simply put comma 9 because that would insinuate that there's data all the way between 0 and 9 and there's not. Well, no, you have to write every single x value. Like that point has an x value of 0, this point has an x value of 1, this point has an x value of 2, and you are supposed to write every single number, but since we're limited on space, I will allow you to put like ... and then maybe 8, 9. But you're supposed to write every single x value represented by the points. Yeah, but put ... showing there's more in between them. Okay, then, anytime you write down a set like this, you put braces around it. Okay, so now, what would the range be? What is the lowest element in the range? 1. The very lowest point has a y value of 1. The next lowest point has a y value of 2. The next lowest point has a y value of 3. All the way up to what number? This one goes to 10 on the y-axis. Okay? Does that make sense? See, over here, you're able to just put 0, infinity because that says from 0 to infinity, everything in between. But down here, this is not included, and this is not included, and this is not included, so you can't just say 0 to 9 and everything in between. You have to just list each element of the domain. Yes? Not yet. Okay, now let's look at number 2. This time, they've given you a word problem but no graph. Omar has decided to take yoga classes for 1 year. The yoga studio costs $10 to join, and then each yoga class is $5. Omar's fees can be represented by the function f of x equals, which is the same thing as y equals, 5x plus 10. The 5x is $5 per class. So wouldn't that mean the x is for class? And then the $10 is the fee to join. Okay, so remember, domain is all about x values, which in this case are classes. So what would the domain start at, Zach? You weren't paying attention, just admit it. Okay, x, everybody understands how I know that the x represents classes, right? Because $5 per class, so x is for classes. So when you're doing domain, you're worried about x values. What's the lowest number you could plug in for x? 0. Think about it. Couldn't she pay her $10 to join and then not ever go back and take a class? So technically, it could start at 0 classes. And that happens. People join gyms and then never go. I don't know. I know an Omar that's a lady. Well, there's a lady that works here that's named Omar. Okay, then, how many classes can she take? As many as she wants. Now, okay, say that they do say for 1 year, but do they say she can only take 1 a day? No. So you have to put infinity. Now, we know that there's only so many minutes in a year, so technically there's going to be a limit to how many classes she can take, but do we really know how many it is? No, so just put infinity. Now, had it said she's going to take classes for a year and you can only take 1 class a day, this would have been from 0 to 365. But they didn't specify how many classes she can take in a day, so it's 0 to infinity. or stretched out. Okay. Now the range. What would the range be? If X is all about classes, what do you think the Y's are all about? The money. What's the lowest amount of money she's going to pay? The $10 to join. She'll never pay below that because that's to join. What's the highest amount she'll pay? Right. We don't know how many classes she'll take, so we don't know how much she'll pay. Well, it is, but then it's $5 for every class she takes. And since she's allowed to take an infinite amount of classes, it'll be an infinite amount of money, since we don't really know. Okay, now, even though there's not a graph, like if I were doing this problem myself, I would do a little sketch. It would just help me to see a visual. Okay, think about it. Where would your y-intercept be? 10. Think about it. Just to join, doesn't she have to pay $10? So we'll just pretend like this is 10, and we'll put a point. But then from there, if X is classes, so I'm just going to put C, well, CL for classes, and the y-axis is cost, what's the line going to do, up or down? Up. It's going to go right for classes taken, and while it's going right, it's going to go up for cost. So that's basically what the graph will look like. So is it going to have an x-intercept? No. Does it have a y-intercept? What is it? 0, 10. At 0 classes taken, she still has paid $10 just to join. Is it increasing or decreasing? Increasing, which means it's positive. Okay, I would say it's discrete. Because I know I drew a line. I probably shouldn't have drawn a line. Because think about it. Can you take half a class? No, and even if you walk in and like say, I'm tired, I'm going to leave halfway through, aren't they still going to charge you for the full class? So technically there's just 0 classes taken, 1 class taken, 2 classes taken, so it's discrete. Okay, is there going to be a maximum? No, so does not exist. Is there a minimum? 0, 10. Right. Since they didn't specify, we can't assume anything, so we just say infinity. Right. Okay, now go to page 19. And I want you to try 4 and 5 by yourself. You did good estimating. Okay, you and your friends are out hiking. You start the hike with 50 pounds of food for the group and can eat about 7 pounds each day. Identify the key features of the graph of this function. Okay, the equation would be y equals, you're eating 7 pounds of food per day, so that's negative 7x, you're 7 pounds of food, and then you started with 50 pounds of food. So that's why the y-intercept is up here at 50, and then from there it goes down 7, right 1, down 7, right 1, okay? Domain. Isn't the furthest left this graph goes right here when you started the trip, and that's at 0 for 0 days? And then the trip lasts until the food runs out at 7.14 days. But let's talk about how we get that 7.14. Okay, and it's brackets on both because it does not continue beyond those. If the equation is this point, doesn't that point represent when they run out of food? So at that point, it's 7 point something days because there's 0 pounds of food. Well, isn't that 0 pounds of food a y value? So I'm going to replace the y with 0. And then I just solve for the x. So you would have just added the 7x over, and then to get the x by itself, divided it by 7, and 50 divided by 7 is 7.14. Well, right, he just didn't write down the actual equation. He just knew. Okay, now for the range. What's the lowest point on the graph? Okay, but 7.14 is an x value. Range is y value, so 0. What's the highest point? 50. Because they go from 0 pounds of food to 50 pounds of food. Now the x-intercept, what is it? Right. Correct. And what's the y-intercept? Right. Is it increasing or decreasing? Decreasing because they're running out of food. So for the same reason, it's negative. It is continuous. And then maximum, what's the maximum point? 0, 50. And what's the minimum point? 7.140 is the lowest point. Okay. Any questions about that one? All right, number 5. First, let's write the equation. Y equals, well, first let's read the question. Mason borrowed $1,200 from a friend to buy a new hot tub. His friend doesn't charge any interest, and Mason makes $50 payments each month. Identify the key features of the graph of this function. Okay, well, y equals, what is the slope? But negative 50, right? Because the graph's going down because he's paying off the debt. And then plus, right, the starting point, what he borrowed. Okay, now for the domain. The domain is the x-axis or the x values, and you always do left, then right. So the furthest left point has an x value of 0. And the furthest right point has an x value of 24. But you can't just simply say 0 to 24 and be done because this is discrete. So you're technically supposed to write out 0, 1 month, 2 months, all the way to 24 months. And since we don't have room, I'll let you write dot, dot, dot. Okay, so what would the range be? Okay, remember though, when you're doing range, first you do the lowest number, then the highest number. So what's the lowest number of the range? Okay, and then after that, what's the next one? 50, because they're going by 50s, and then 100, and then dot, 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 all the way up to 1200. Okay, is there an x-intercept? What is it? 24, 0. Is there a y-intercept? Okay, what is it? Right, 0, 1200. Is this graph increasing or decreasing? Decreasing. Is it continuous or discrete? Right, because there's no data in between the points. He only pays him once a month. So there's a point for each month that he pays. It's also negative. What is the maximum point, the highest point? 0, 1200. And what is the minimum point? 24, 0. Okay, any questions? Okay, that's where we'll stop for today. I want you to finish page 19, those two problems. Try them tonight. Yes.